The letter arrived on a Wednesday in October, and it was the strangest piece of mail I have received in 53 years of being alive on this earth, which includes some genuinely strange mail. It was typed on personal stationery, not HOA letterhead, and it was signed by Maureen Platt, who had been the president of the Lakeview Pines HOA for 9 years, and it was asking me, in language that started formal and became increasingly personal as the paragraphs went on, to consider selling my lake cabin to her son Kyle at a price she described as fair and community-minded, because Kyle and his wife were hoping to start a family and needed the space, and the lakefront access would be wonderful for the children, and she had always felt the cabin was underutilized, and she thought I might find that letting it go to a young family in the community would be a rewarding decision. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on my kitchen counter and made coffee and read it a third time because I wanted to be sure I was understanding what Maureen Platt was actually saying. She was asking me to sell my property because her son wanted it. My name is Walter Osei, and I am 53 years old, and I have owned the cabin at 14 Lakeview Drive in the Lakeview Pines community in northern Minnesota for 11 years. I bought it because I grew up in landlocked central Ohio, and I had spent my adult career as a civil engineer working in cities, and I had decided in my early 40s that I wanted a place where the water was the main event. Lakeview Pines sits on the eastern shore of Cedar Lake, which is a clean natural lake about 2 miles across with good fishing, clear water, and the particular quality of quiet that you only get in places where the loons are still a regular presence. My cabin is not large. It is 1,200 square feet, a 2-bedroom structure built in the 1960s and renovated carefully by the previous owners, with a covered porch facing the lake, a small dock, a stone fireplace, and a quarter-acre lot that runs from the county road down to the shore. I use it from May through October most years, sometimes longer if the fall is warm. My daughter and her family visit for a week or two in summer. I fish in the mornings and read on the porch in the afternoons and cook on the outdoor grill in the evenings. And it is, without exaggeration, the best thing I have done with any money I have ever earned. I had not been aware that Maureen Platt's son Kyle existed until this letter. I had been aware of Maureen Platt for 11 years, in the way that you are aware of an HOA president in a lake community. She managed the common area, organized the seasonal dock assignment process, ran the annual meeting, and sent violation notices when people left their boats in non-approved locations or ran their generators too late at night. She had sent me 2 such notices in 11 years, both legitimate, both addressed promptly. Our relationship was the relationship of a resident and an administrator who did not particularly need to be more than that. The letter changed my understanding of Maureen Platt in a specific way. A person who is willing to write to a neighbor and ask them to sell their property because she would prefer her son to have it is a person who has developed a particular relationship with authority, the kind where the authority becomes confused, over time, with the authority's preferences. Maureen had been running Lakeview Pines for 9 years. She had managed the dock assignments and the violation notices and the seasonal schedules and the annual meeting and the capital improvement votes. And somewhere in 9 years of that she had apparently begun to feel that managing the community meant having some say in what happened to properties within it, including properties she did not own. I wrote back, 1 paragraph typed, no return address formality because she had not used HOA letterhead. The paragraph said that my cabin was not for sale and that I hoped Kyle and his wife would find a suitable property through the normal process of searching the local real estate market, which had good inventory in the region. I thanked her for her letter and wished her family well. I mailed it and went back to my life. The second letter came 6 weeks later. This one was longer. It expanded on the themes of the first, the young family, the lakefront dream, the underutilized cabin, the community-minded spirit that she hoped I would find in myself, and added some new elements. She mentioned that the cabin's dock assignment was currently in the preferred position on the north end of the community dock area, and that dock assignments were reviewed annually at the board's discretion. She mentioned that the community road maintenance schedule, which affected lake access, was prioritized by a number of factors that the board managed. She mentioned, almost in passing, that there had been some questions raised about the setback compliance of my cabin's porch addition, which the previous owners had built in 2008. I read those 3 paragraphs several times. She was threatening me, not directly, not in words that would hold up as an explicit threat in any legal proceeding. But the message was clear: cooperate on the cabin sale or face complications with your dock assignment, your road access priority, and a compliance review of your porch. I sat at my kitchen table in Columbus, where I live when I am not at the cabin, and I thought about this for a long time. I am a civil engineer. I solve problems by first understanding them completely before I decide on an approach. What I understood about this problem was the following. Maureen Platt wanted my cabin for her son. She had no legal claim to it, no purchase right, no mechanism under the HOA governing documents or under Minnesota property law that gave her any authority over my decision to sell or not sell. What she had was administrative control over several community processes, dock assignments, road priority, compliance review, and she was implying those processes could be used against me. I also understood that each of those implied threats had a specific shape. Dock assignments were governed by the HOA's dock policy, which I had read carefully when I bought the property. Road maintenance priority was similarly governed by documented criteria. And the porch setback question, I pulled the 2008 building permit for the porch addition, which I had obtained from the previous owners at closing as part of the documentation package, and I confirmed that the porch had been permitted, inspected, and signed off by the county. A setback compliance question about a permitted structure was not a legitimate concern. What Maureen had was the ability to make administrative processes annoying and time-consuming. What she did not have was a genuine legal lever. I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Home, same Patricia she gets around. She is very good, and I described both letters and the situation. Patricia said the letters were concerning not because they had legal force, but because they signaled that Maureen was willing to misuse her administrative position, and that misuse of an HOA president's position was actionable but best addressed by building a comprehensive record first. She said, document every interaction, save every letter, and do not respond to any threats casually. If she follows through on any of the implied threats, document those too, and we will address each one as it occurs. I said, what about addressing the underlying situation? Patricia said, what do you mean? I said, I'm not going to sell my cabin, but I would like to make clear to Maureen that the approach she is taking is going to cost her more than it costs me. Not through aggression, not through legal threats at this point, but through something that makes the geometry of the situation clear to her before she does anything further. Patricia said, what are you thinking? I described what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment and then said, that is legally permissible if you own what you say you own. I said, I own exactly what I say I own. I have the deed. She said, then it is your property and your decision. Here is what I owned, in addition to the cabin. When I bought the cabin at 14 Lakeview Drive 11 years ago, the purchase included the cabin lot, and also, in the same deed transaction, a small adjacent parcel that the previous owners had acquired separately and included in the sale as a package. The adjacent parcel was a strip of land, roughly 40 feet wide and 120 feet long, that ran along the eastern edge of my cabin lot and extended back from the lake road toward the interior of the community. It was an irregular piece, a remnant from an old property division that had never been developed, and it was fully mine, clearly titled, documented on the survey. What made this parcel relevant was its position. It ran along the eastern boundary of my cabin lot and also along the western boundary of the Lakeview Pines HOA's community property, specifically the community clubhouse and administrative building, which was where Maureen had her office and where the annual meetings and the board sessions were held. My parcel wrapped around the western and southern edges of the HOA's community property like a bracket. The HOA's community building and its surrounding small parking area accessed from the internal community road, which ran through the community from the Lake Road. The access to that community road from the main Lake Road passed along the edge of my parcel. Not through it, the road itself was on the community's land, but the landscaping, the sight lines, the general approach corridor to the HOA building all relied on the visual and physical context of my parcel remaining as it was, which was an open, unmaintained strip of natural vegetation. I had never done anything with that parcel. It sat there for 11 years, growing wild, providing habitat, not bothering anyone. I had no particular need for it. I had always had the right to fence it. I had never had a reason to. Until now. Minnesota residential property law allows a landowner to erect a fence on their property line without HOA approval when the fence meets the relevant county height and material standards, and when the property is not subject to a specific covenant restriction prohibiting fencing. I had checked both. The county standard for residential fencing in the Lake District was a maximum of 6 feet for solid fencing and no limit for open rail fencing. My parcel was subject to the same HOA covenants as my cabin lot, and those covenants addressed fence aesthetics in the residential lake zone, but did not prohibit fencing on undeveloped adjacent parcels. I contracted a fence company, not an elaborate fence. A standard cedar rail fence, 3 rails, the kind that is entirely common in lake country, natural-looking, well within aesthetic guidelines. It would run along the full perimeter of my parcel, along the Lake Road frontage, along the western and southern edges of the HOA community property, and back along my cabin lot line. The fence would not block road access to the HOA building. The road itself was on HOA land and the fence was on mine, but it would define, in visible and permanent cedar rail terms, exactly where my property was and exactly how closely it approached the HOA community building. The south fence line, running along the edge of the HOA parking area, would be approximately 12 feet from the community building's western wall. 12 feet of cedar rail fence, planted along my property line, fully legal, fully permitted, fully within my rights. I submitted the fence permit application to the county. I received approval in 9 days. I called Maureen Platt the day the permit arrived. I told her I had received her 2 letters, that my cabin was not for sale, and that I wanted to inform her as a courtesy that I was going to be installing a fence on my adjacent parcel, which was permitted and scheduled to begin the following week. She said, "A fence on the parcel? What parcel?" I said, "The 40 by 120 strip adjacent to my cabin lot, running along the western and southern edge of the HOA community property. It is listed in my deed. I have owned it for 11 years. There was a silence on the phone that was longer and more specific than the silences I have described in other stories. This was the silence of someone doing spatial geometry in their head and not liking what the geometry was producing. She said, "Walter, I don't think that's necessary." I said, "I have county permit approval. The work begins Monday." She said, "Can we talk about this?" I said, "Of course. Please contact Patricia Holmes' office to arrange a meeting. Her information is in the certified letter you will receive today." I had already mailed the certified letter. It documented both of Maureen's letters, noted that they contained implied threats related to administrative processes, stated that my cabin was not for sale and would not be the subject of further discussion, and noted that I was exercising my property rights on my adjacent parcel in a lawful manner, and that any interference with that exercise would be addressed through appropriate legal channels. The fence went up on Monday. Part 2. The fence crew was a 3-man operation from a company in Brainerd that did lake property fencing regularly and that had the practical efficiency of people who know exactly what they are doing and have no interest in drama about it. They staked the corners using my survey, pulled a string line the full perimeter, and started setting posts at 8 in the morning. I was at the property for the installation. I sat on my porch with coffee and watched the posts go in. The weather was good for late October in Minnesota. Cold but clear. and the cedar posts had that clean, sharp smell that new fencing has before the first winter works on it. By noon, the posts were in on the Lake Road frontage and the first section of the western run, the part closest to my cabin. By late afternoon, the full western run was posted, and the crew had turned the corner onto the south run, which paralleled the HOA parking area at 12 feet. Maureen came out at 2 p.m. She walked across the HOA parking area and stood at what would become her side of the south fence line and looked at the crew working and then looked at me on my porch. I raised my coffee mug in greeting. She did not raise anything. She came to my door at 2:30. I opened it. She said, "Walter, this is extreme." I said, "It is a cedar rail fence on my property. I have the county permit." She said, "This fence is going to." She stopped. She was working through what she wanted to say. She said, "The community building is going to look like it's behind a fence." I said, "The community building is on the HOA's property. My fence is on my property. There is a 12-foot gap between them." She said, "It's going to look enclosed." I said, "Maureen, I received 2 letters from you suggesting that I should sell my property to your son and implying that dock assignments and road maintenance and porch compliance reviews might be affected by my decision. I want to make sure we both understand what is happening here. I am exercising my legal right to fence my property. My cabin is not for sale. And I would like to make clear that any administrative action that appears connected to my refusal to sell will be treated as a misuse of your HOA position and addressed accordingly." She looked at me for a long moment. The afternoon light was behind her, and the fence posts were going in on the south run, and the cedar smell was in the air. She said, "I only wanted what was best for Kyle." I said, "I understand that. I would like what is best for me, which is to keep my cabin and to have my property rights respected." She said, "Can we work something out?" I said, "There is nothing to work out on the cabin. As for the fence, it is going in on my property as permitted. If there is something specific about the fence that you believe creates a legitimate issue, your attorney can contact Patricia Home." She left. The crew finished the south run by end of day. The full perimeter was completed by Tuesday noon. The fence looked exactly like a cedar rail lake fence, which is to say it looked natural and appropriate, and like something that had every reason to be there. 3 rails, good cedar, well built. From the lake road, it defined the front of my parcel cleanly. From the HOA parking area, it ran along the south boundary in a straight line that was, as I had said, 12 feet from the community building's western wall. 12 feet is not nothing. You can walk 12 feet. A car can park in less than 12 feet. Nothing was blocked, nothing was obstructed, no access was denied, but the visual definition was complete. The HOA community building now sat with my fence along its western and southern approach, and the relationship between Maureen's administrative domain and my private property was made visible and permanent in cedar rail. Patricia received a call from the HOA's attorney, a man named Scott Dillon who practiced in Brainerd, within 3 days. Scott's position, on behalf of the HOA board, was that the fence installation was a hostile act designed to interfere with the community's enjoyment of the common area, and that the HOA was considering whether it constituted a spite fence under Minnesota statute. Patricia's response was detailed and, I thought, rather elegant. She noted that a spite fence claim in Minnesota required establishing that the fence served no legitimate purpose and was constructed solely to annoy or injure the neighboring property owner. My fence, she noted, served the entirely legitimate purpose of defining and enclosing my property, which was a standard and long-established property right. She attached the county permit. My deed documentation showing the parcel had been in my possession for 11 years, and a note that the fence had been planned and permitted prior to any legal contact with the HOA, meaning it could not retroactively be characterized as a legal response to anything. She also attached copies of Maureen's 2 letters. Scott Dillon did not respond to that letter for 2 weeks, which was about how long I estimated it took him to read Maureen's letters, understand what they implied, and explained to his client that her letters had created a significant problem for the HOA's ability to characterize my fence as the aggressive act in this sequence. When he did respond, his tone was different. He asked whether there was a path to a resolution that worked for all parties. He noted that the HOA board had reviewed the situation and wanted to address the concerns I had raised about the content of Maureen's correspondence. Patricia asked me what I wanted. I told her I wanted a written acknowledgement from the HOA board, not from Maureen personally, that the 2 letters Maureen had sent were not authorized by or representative of the HOA board's position, and that no administrative action, dock assignment, road maintenance priority, compliance review would be taken against my property in connection with my decision about whether to sell it. I wanted that acknowledgement recorded in the HOA meeting minutes. And I wanted confirmation that Maureen had been informed by the board that her conduct had been improper. I did not ask for her removal. I did not ask for damages. I did not ask for anything related to the fence, which was staying where it was regardless. Scott took this back to the board. The board met, apparently without Maureen in the room for that portion of the agenda, and voted to issue the acknowledgement. The confirmation that Maureen had been informed of the board's position came through her own behavior over the following weeks. She did not attend the next 2 board meetings, which was noticed by several community members, and when she did return, she was quieter than she had been. The acknowledgement was drafted, approved, and entered into the meeting minutes. Patricia received the certified copy and added it to my file. On the dock assignment question, my dock position was reviewed that winter, as it always was, and I received my annual assignment in the same preferred north position I had held for 11 years. The review was conducted by the dock committee rather than Maureen, which was a procedural change the board had apparently made quietly. The committee's criteria were applied to all residents equally, and I met them as I always had. On the road maintenance question, nothing happened. The road was maintained as it always had been. On the porch compliance question, nothing happened. The permitted porch remains. I sit on it every evening in the summer and watch the light change over the water. The fence is still there. It has weathered one Minnesota winter and has the beginning of the gray patina that cedar develops in the northern climate, that silver quality that Lake Country fencing gets after a few seasons. It looks like it has always been there. It looks like it belongs. In the spring, I planted some native shrubs along my side of the south fence line, the side facing the HOA community property. Wild roses and dogwood, the kind that grow naturally along lake margins in Minnesota. They will fill in over a few years and provide wildlife habitat and soften the fence visually while keeping the boundary clear. I did this because it is good land stewardship, which is what you do when you own a piece of land. You tend it, you plant things that belong there, you define it and you maintain it, and you make clear by your presence and your attention that it is yours. Maureen Platt's son Kyle bought a cabin on the west shore of a different lake 2 counties over. I know this because our community is small enough that news travels, and because one of my neighbors mentioned it conversationally without any idea it was relevant to me. I wished him well. I do not know Kyle. He did nothing wrong in this story. He wanted a lake cabin, and his mother tried to get him one through channels she had no right to use, and that was her doing, not his. Lakeview Pines is a good community. Cedar Lake is a good lake. The loons are still there, which is how you know a lake is healthy, and on still mornings in June you can hear them from the porch before sunrise, that particular call that is both mournful and completely self-possessed, the sound of a creature that knows exactly where it is and has no interest in being anywhere else. My cabin is not for sale. The fence knows it, the deed knows it, the HOA meeting minutes know it. I pour my coffee in the morning and carry it out to the porch and sit in the same chair I have sat in for 11 years, and the lake does what it does, which is exist completely and without asking permission, and I do the same. That is enough. That has always been enough.